how to different transformation of the ecologically, which is the referendums and its insecurity about the procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutionalizations, which is the gradually how to different coincidence, which is the systematic and its eventually transformation, and it's regardless of the prospectus for their ideologically, which is the eventually and it's growing for the different regardless and it's a prosperity for their eventually transforming the institutional structural, which is the growth and its orientation for their different referrals and its ecologically, which is the defining and its associations, how to different growing and its influential part of the approach and the navigation and systematic way of the growth, which is the eventually transformation and it's growing for their different referendums and its ecologically prosperity, which is the eventually and its growth referendums for their security, how to dynamic procedures and it's growing for their influential association and its navigation for their systematic part of the approach and different growth and its orientation for their society, which is the inclusivity and the challenges for their referendums and its insecurity about the conservative of the minds, social evolutionary and challenges for their deficiency and transformation for the regulatory and its efficiency for their different growth and its orientation for the navigation and systematic way of the ideologically, which is partially differentiation and its ecologically, which is the defining structure, how to different growing and its partially association, which is the navigation in systematic part of the approach and it's growing for their referendums and its insecurity about the procedures and its efficiency for the different referendums and its ecologically prosperity, the deficiency of the transformations role in its regulatory efficiency, which is the procedures and its defining a structural for the different regardless of the procedures and its influential part of the approach, how to different navigation and systematic way of the orientation of the navigation and its partially and its role in its regulatory for their transformation, it is the defining a structural and its regulatory for their transformation, the growth and its orientation for the different distinguish and transformation for the ideologically and its association and its navigation for their growth and its balance for their societal and its structural for the balance for their resource efficiency, how to different challenges and it's growing for their association and its navigation for their societal, which is the eventually and transforming the structural and it's growing for their influential part of the approach and different growing for their influential structural, which is the role in its regulatory for the transformation and it's growing for their influential association for the navigation and systematic way of the growing and its influential structural, how to different reconsideration of their transformations and its associated for their eventually and in transforming the associations, which is navigates the systematic way and challenges for their effective part of the approach, how to different revolutionary and transforming the structural for their growing and its influential part of the approach and the associated and its neutralization for their effective for their transformation, the growth and its orientation for their socialization and its institutional structural for the different challenges and its hoping and systematic way of the growth and its balance for their supplementary ideologically, which is eventually transforming the structural and it's growing for their influential and its part of the approach, how to different navigation and systematic way of the growth and its orientation for their challenges, which is the efficiency and dynamic institutionalization for the different referendums and its ecologically prosperity, the different challenges and its different ecologically prosperity for their institutional structural and how to navigation for the challenges for their effective part of the approach and the different systematic and its orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges, which is the referendums and its insecurity about the procedures and its influential structural and its navigation for their society, how to different challenges and its efficiency for their dynamic institutional structural, the growing and its part of the approach, how to different navigation and systematic way of the growing and its influential structural, the defining and its associations for the navigation and systematic way of the orientation of the society, different coordination and its mindset of the peoples, which is the revolutionizing the process, and it's growing for their influential part of the approach, and the different referendums and its insecurity about their procedures and the efficiency for the different regardless and its prosperity, the different regardless of the prosperity and its institutionalization for the growing and its influential structural for the resources about how to different compartmentalization methodologically of work and its technology association adaptation which is requirement, different government policy which helps to improving the designing of different technology in the cooperative advantage, which is the ideologically and transforming the associations for the different navigation of the social and its evolutionary for their challenges, hoping and systematic way of the ideologically how to different distinguish and transformation, which is the reconsideration of the society and its inclusivity for their challenges and its referendums and its insecurity about their procedures and the efficiency of the dynamic institutionalization, the procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutionalization, which is the referendums and its insecurity about different procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutional structural and its growth and its orientation of the societal part of the approach, different growth and its orientation for the different navigation and systematic way of the orientation and its challenges, how to different growing and its influential structural, which is the navigation and systematic way of the challenges, the orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges for the defining structural and its resource efficiency, the dynamic institutionalization and its growing for their influential structural and its resource efficiency, which is the procedures and its influential association, the navigation and systematic way of the orientation of the social and its evolutionary for their challenges, which is the eventually in transforming the structural, how to different navigation and systematic way of the partially differentiation, which is the inclusivity and challenges, which is the defining and sophisticated structural and its procedures which is happening in the emerging scope of the employment opportunity throughout the India, which have geographically condition and specifically for the different regions which is not properly indulged for the opportunity of different sector, but specifically different sectors which is the considers and its coincidence for the emerging technology and its advantage for the resources, how to different transformationals, which is the navigation and transforming the structural and its growing for their influential and its associated for the balance, which is the resources about the growing and its influential structural for the resource efficiency, how to different consideration of the associated and its neutralization, which is the procedures and its efficiency for their dynamic institutional structure, the growth and its orientation for the different navigation and systematic and its partially referendums for their ecologically, which is the defining structural and its resources about different growing and its influential part of the approach and different growing for their influential structure, the navigation and systematic way of the partially differentiation, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different insecurity about their procedures and the efficiency of their challenges for their influential structural, which is the navigation and systematic way of the growth efficiency, the scope and its balance for the referendums and its insecurity about their procedures and its institutional structural, how to different challenges and its growing for their different regulatory and its advantage, the challenges and its regulatory for their advantage growing for their different institutionalization, which is the functional and its associations, and it's a way of the occupancy of the transformation, which is the core values and how to different distinguish and the aesthetics of work, different data and its policy execution, schemes for the welfare and the social structural of economically and socially structural, which is finding for the navigation and its argumentation for the reformation, how to different systematic and its orientation for their challenges, which is the scope and its balance for their different security and transformational, which is the inclusivity and challenges for the different referendums and its insecurity about different finding and its procedures for their effective part of the approach, The defining a structural and its regulatory advantage, which is the role in its regulatory of their transformation, which is the gradually insecurity about their procedures, and it's effective for their transforming a structural and its regulatory for their different advantage. How to different advantage and scope and challenges for their defining association and its navigation for their surveillance and challenges for the working capacity, which is the neutralization and its phase orientation of the social in its evolutionary for their scope efficiency and its gracefully responsible, which is the scope and its balance for their social and its evolutionary for their challenges. How to different navigation in systematic and its partially association, which is the navigation and challenges for their effective and its orientation of the social and its dynamic procedures of the efficiency, the inclusivity and its scope, which is variations and the working for the different orientation of the socialization. How to different socialization and its gracefully responsibility, which is the transforming the structural, the navigation and systematic way of the orientation for the challenges. How to different systematic and its procedures for their eventually transforming and its systematic part of the approach, growth orientation, navigation and systematic and its orientation of the socialization procedures, and it's effective for their specifically, which is the indulge of different com, com, comprehensions of the inclusivity, which is the associated in defining association. It could be possible, and it could be also be redressal mechanism, which is the surveillance and its scope for their effective and its cooperative associations. How to different cooperative association in its navigation for their systematic and challenges, which is the eventually transforming the structural, the navigation and its inclusivity for the different regulatory and its advantage for their prosperity and its eventually for their transformation, which is gradually and its responsibility for the different association and its navigation for their systematic. How to different inclusivity and challenges for their effective part of the approach and different inclusivity for their different regulatory and transformation. How to different defining a structural and its role in its regulatory for their inclusivity, which is the navigation of the society, the different partially association and its navigation for their systematic and its partially differentiation for their inclusivity, which is challenges for their effective part of the approach and different navigation and its inclusivity for their challenges, which is the scope and its orientation of the society, the different scope and its orientation of the society, which is the inclusivity and challenges for their different referendums and its insecurity about the procedures. How to different effective for their transformations and its gracefully responsibility, the challenges and its scope efficiency, which is the dynamic institutional and structural and its growing for their eventual transformations, the navigation in systematic and its partially referendums for their ecologically, which is the defining and its association, navigation and its partially regulatory for their transforming and its associated for their neutral efficiency. How to different challenges, which is the efficiency and dynamic, which is the growing and its influential part of the approach, which is the social and its evolutionary for their challenges, working capacity for their neutralization and its scope efficiency. It is most adversely transformations when the life will be temporarily stuck in a particular way, but the when we are just try to move further, and basically it will be helping for the god, it will helping for the natures, and it will also be our surrounding people which helps to move forward. But when you have the positive sense of work and it's working basically, which is the uh, role in its regulatory, which is their transformation and systematic way of the orientation, which is the gracefully transforming the association, and its navigation for the systematic and its partially referrals for their ecologically, which is the defining as structural, the growth and its balance for their social and its evolutionary for their challenges. How to navigation and systematic and its partially role and its regulatory for their efficiency and challenges for their capacity and its requirement, the procedures and it's eventually for their transforming the structural, which is the navigation and systematic way of the challenges, which is the eventually and its procedures for their different capacity, which is the requirement and thinking about the defining association and its navigation and its part of the approach, how to different surveillance for their desirable concept about the lateral efficiency and its scope for their balances and its working for their capacity requirement। ऐसे ही चलता रहा ना तो बाई गॉड एक दिन हम भी चल बसेंगे। सिर्फ 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 ऐसे ही रट्टा मार रट्टा मार रट्टा मार बोलते रहो। रट्टा मार नहीं बोलना है भाई, जस्ट तुमको अपना थोड़ा सा और ज़्यादा डीपर डीपर स्किल्स लगा कर उसको और ज़्यादा इम्प्रूव करो। इसमें डेटा घुसाओ, उसमें स्टैटिक्स घुसाओ, उसमें बहुत सारे फ़ोटो घुसाओ, उसमें वीडियो घुसाओ, थोड़ा मोड़ा इधर उधर का सराउंडिंग चीज़ों को घुसाओ, तब ना थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग बनेगा। ऐसे ही डेली आते हैं बक के चले जाते हैं, डेली आते हैं बक के जाते बात, लेकिन एक ना एक दिन ज़रूर इम्प्रूव करके आएंगे। ओके दोस्त, ठीक है।